Good morning. Have you ever felt like someone talked about joy in a way that just fell flat? You know, someone brings up the topic of joy and it just feels maybe colorless, or it's like it's 2D and black and white when it could be 3D and in color. Well, what's up with that? Why is it? I don't know about you, but in my experience, sometimes I've been around Christian circles, and I'm like, I just don't like the way they're talking about joy. So here's what I'm going to try to do, and I'm not sure if we're going to be able to succeed at this, but let's try to talk about joy in a way that's not trite or glib. You feel me? I would like to try something just a little different. If you actually have my cell phone number or my email, pull it up right now, and then when this is done, you tell me what stood out from this video. I'd be very curious. It'll be very interesting. So I'll also put the email in the description to this. But let me introduce you to the outline for this, all right? We're going to go from cheap joy to rich wine to the end with a capital E. You like that? Can you anticipate what's going to be said? Well, let's break it down first with cheap joy. Why is it that when some people talk about joy, it seems so cheap? It seems flat. It seems black and white. We have a hard time understanding joy versus happiness. Happiness is an emotion that can happen in a moment because of circumstances, but joy isn't quite the same thing. Joy isn't quite the same thing as happiness. And so what's going on there? For myself, I think one of the reasons why we have cheap joy in life is because sometimes we also engage in cheap sadness, or we rush through sadness too quickly. And for my own self, I'll be a bit honest, I've been rather depressed the past couple weeks. This has been a hard season with, personally, my dad dying, and then COVID, and then racial relations, and man, the slow drain of not being able to be around some of you lovely folks. I know you understand what that's like. This is a weird season. But we can't rush or cheapen the sad emotions that we might be feeling. And when we do that, if you've got cheap sadness, of course, you're only going to rush through it and then have cheap joy. And so sometimes in Christian circles, we're very, very uncomfortable with sadness. I remember being here in the sanctuary, and sometimes people would get up and leave because they didn't feel like they could smile. They didn't feel like they were ready to show joy, and that's okay. You don't have to come to church. You shouldn't have to come to church and fake a smile. That'd be dishonest. That's not good. That has no integrity. So it's interesting. We have a crucified God who learned how to weep. And in that sense, Jesus is very much like the prophet Jeremiah, who was a weeping prophet. We have a God that knows how to cry, and that's okay, because that also means that God knows how to experience joy. Now, this past week, I actually ordered something on Amazon. I'm going to show it to you, and then we're going to have a side cut, I think. But it's this. This is The Wedding at Cana. And I really enjoy these types of paintings, one, because the perspective is way off. It's like a reproduction of an era when they didn't know how to paint humans well. But you can see there's the jars. You can see the boy right here, when he's pouring the water, as the water's pouring, you can see right here, it's turning from white into red. That's fantastic. And then here's Jesus, obviously talking with his mother. However, this story comes up in John chapter 2. His mother, Mary, notices a lack. She notices that something's missing. And so she goes to him and says, hey, we need to get some more wine. And so Jesus takes the jars that were used for purification purposes, for baptisms. He takes those things and he changes that water meant for purification ritual and turns that into wine. So what's going on there? Because if you ask me, it seems like God approves of purification rites and things, that's good, but he really enjoys celebration. That God actually is very passionate about making sure that real joy happens. But it's more than just that. He brought joy after noticing the potential sadness of the situation. The party's going to end. There's something to be said about the fact that joy is only real when we walk to it through the hard circumstances that we're going through. And if we try to skip over those hard circumstances, that joy may not feel very authentic. Like I said before, it might feel black and white in 2D and maybe not very lasting. Now, there's something else really fascinating about this painting, this icon, is that it shows a married couple and all of their friends. Well, there's a famous theologian named Richard of St. Victor. He was a medieval theologian. He came to be of notoriety when working and writing in Paris, and I think it was the 1100s. And he says this about God, and this has to do with Trinity and community and everything. If God is one, then God can be good. Cool. If God is two, God can be love, because love has to be shared. But since God is three, God can be joy. And I like that, because joy is something that's best experienced and maybe most activated when in community. There's something fascinating that when joy happens in community and people honestly walk together through hardship and sadness together, they can get to joy together. But more than that, it's like it explodes, it multiplies. And this past fall, if you remember, we had the church renewal retreat. And on that Saturday, Sarah Sexton and I, she's a wonderful person, we went up with some of our middle schoolers that were present. And we went up to the youth room, and I said, I have no idea what kind of lesson we're going to come up with. Let's just see what happens. And then the conversation evolved over an hour, and these middle schoolers taught me something. And we came up with this single statement. There was a whole bunch of us, but Will Esterhigh eventually went and shared it with Jonathan Miller. And the statement was, sadness is divided when shared. It's like it gets broken apart the more you share it, because other people can help you carry that sadness. But then joy is multiplied when shared. And I remember we were upstairs in the youth room. We wrote it up on the whiteboard. I was just like, my goodness, from the mouths of babes, they're dropping wisdom on all of us adults, which is exactly what happened when Will shared what all of us came up with the rest of the church. Sadness is divided when shared, but joy is multiplied when shared. Now, last thing, I said we were going to finish with the end, with a capital E. The outline for today was cheap joy, rich wine, the end, with a capital E. Well, at the end of all things, we have to pay attention to what we think the narrative, the story of the universe is going to be. Because joy can be difficult when you think that the narrative of the universe is going to end in destruction and sadness and horror. There's not much joy when you look forward to something like that. But there's something to the fact that God in Jesus has chosen to align himself with our pain and suffering, that's the crucifixion, to overcome it from within, that's the resurrection, but then give us a promise. The end of all things is actually quite hopeful. There's unending grace, there's unending love, and here's the most wonderful thing. And in order to share this idea, I'm going to take a statement from Martin Luther King Jr. and kind of paraphrase it. He said that the moral arc of the universe is long, but it bends towards justice. I completely agree. We've got to work together towards that, but I'm going to tweak it and say the metaphysical arc of the universe is long, but it ends with love. It comes to love. God is our omega, and God is love. And because the end of all things is love, we can have joy now. And so let's try this. Let's try to anchor our entire lives in this long arc of a story. That even though we might have hardship and sadness, we can still have joy. Maybe not happiness in the moment, but we can still have joy in the fact that we know that the end of all things is love with a capital L. And that helps us to have joy with a capital J now. So let's do a benediction. I don't know. Let's do that, right? So may you, the watcher, with grace and peace, learn how to walk through your own sadness and despair that sometimes can happen with integrity. Don't rush it. Don't cheapen it, but learn how to share it with other people that know how to carry it with you, because then it will be divided rather than consuming you. And may you and I and everyone else learn how to celebrate with joy the long arc of the universe that ends in God, who is love itself. Grace and peace. Much love to all of you.